They saw a homeless man, a ghost haunting the city's alleys. They had no idea that beneath the grime, a federal agent was about to be pushed to his breaking point, not by the criminals he hunted, but by the very badge sworn to protect. The cold seeped through the thin layers of my disguise, a gnawing, persistent ache that settled deep in my bones. For 3 weeks this alley had been my home, this cardboard pallet my bed, this tattered army surplus coat my only shield against the city's biting November wind. To the world, I was another nameless, faceless ghost, haunting the periphery of society. A statistic, a problem to be ignored. My name was James, or sometimes John, or whatever mumbled syllable came out when someone bothered to ask. My real name, the one that came with a badge, a gun, and a federal mandate, was Marcus Thorne, Special Agent Marcus Thorne, FBI, and I was hunting a different kind of ghost. My target was a ruthless drug trafficking ring that used the city's homeless population as its invisible army of mules. They were preyed upon, used up, and when they became a liability, they simply disappeared. The man orchestrating it all was a phantom, known only as the Ghost, and the only way to get close to him was to become one of the forgotten souls he exploited. So I shed my suit, my credentials, my entire life, and dove headfirst into the abyss. I learned the rhythm of the streets, the best grates for warmth, the soup kitchen schedules, the unspoken code of who to trust and who to fear. Most importantly, I learned who the predators were, and tonight one of them was approaching. I heard the heavy, rhythmic tread of police-issue boots on the wet pavement long before I saw him. The sound echoed with an authority that made the other guys in the alley shrink back into the shadows. Officer Miller. I knew his name well. I'd seen him work. He had a reputation for being a bully with a badge, a man who got his kicks from tormenting those who couldn't fight back. He was a walking storm of misplaced rage, and his favorite targets were people who looked like me. Well, well, what do we have here? His voice was a low growl, thick with disdain. The beam of his flashlight cut through the gloom, landing squarely on my face. I squinted, raising a grimy hand to shield my eyes, playing the part. Just another parasite, leeching off the city. Beside him stood a younger officer, his face pale and uncertain in the harsh glare of the streetlights. I recognized him as Officer Davis, a rookie, barely a year on the force. He looked uncomfortable, his eyes darting around nervously, avoiding eye contact. He was the weak link, the conscience. I'd made a note of him early on. "Just trying to stay warm, officer," I mumbled, keeping my voice raspy and weak. I kept my head down, a posture of submission. In this world, eye contact was a challenge, and challenging a man like Miller was a death wish. "Trying to stay warm," Miller scoffed, taking a step closer. The smell of cheap coffee and stale cigarettes rolled off him in waves. "You people are a stain on this city. Look at you. Disgusting." He nudged my meager collection of belongings with the toe of his gleaming black boot, a half-empty water bottle, a small worn Bible someone had given me, and a tin can with about 75 cents in it. The can tipped over, the coins scattering with a pathetic jingle across the filthy concrete. Davis shifted his weight. "Miller, let's just tell him to move along. We've got other calls." "In a minute, rookie," Miller snapped, not taking his eyes off me. He seemed to be feeding off my silence, my apparent fear. He wanted a reaction. He craved it. "I asked you a question. What are you doing here?" "Nothing, sir." "No trouble," I whispered, my heart rate steady, my training kicking in, keeping the rage that simmered just below the surface in a tightly locked box. I had to endure this. The mission was everything. Blowing my cover over a power-tripping beat cop wasn't an option. I had weeks of intelligence, names, drop points, all of it hinging on me remaining invisible. Miller's lip curled into a sneer. "Nothing. You're always doing nothing. Worthless." He took another step, his shadow completely engulfing me. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, the pure, unadulterated menace. This was the moment I had been warned about by the others on the street. This was Miller's favorite part of the show. "Get up," he commanded. I pushed myself up slowly, my fake limp more pronounced, my body language screaming defeat. My joints ached from the cold, and the movement was genuinely painful. I kept my eyes fixed on the ground, waiting for the inevitable. It came without another word. The motion was fast, brutal, and unexpected. His boot swung out, connecting squarely with my ribs. The impact was a starburst of white-hot pain that stole the air from my lungs. I gasped, stumbling backward against the cold brick wall, the rough surface scraping my back. A wave of nausea washed over me, and for a split second the line between my cover and my reality blurred. The pain was real. The humiliation was real. "I said get up!" he roared, his face contorted in a mask of pure hatred. "You think you can just lay around here all day?" Through the haze of pain, I saw Davis flinch, his hand twitching towards his radio, as if he wanted to call for help, but didn't have the nerve. He opened his mouth to protest. "Miller, that's enough." But Miller ignored him. He was in his own world, a world where he was king, and I was less than human. He saw my pain, and it only fueled his rage. He took a menacing step forward, his hand dropping to his belt. My training screamed at me. Every instinct I had honed over a decade in the Bureau was firing off alarm bells. Disarm, neutralize, end the threat. But I couldn't. I was James, the homeless man, powerless. Then Miller's eyes lit up with a cruel, new idea. A slow, malicious smile spread across his face as he reached into one of his tactical pouches. "You know," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "I think I know what the problem is. People like you always have a little something on you to help you forget your pathetic lives." He pulled out a small plastic baggie containing a fine white powder. "And it looks like it's my lucky day." He was going to plant it on me. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a beating anymore. This would be an arrest. My fingerprints run through the system. My cover, my mission, my entire career would be vaporized in an instant. Everything I had worked for, the people I was trying to save, it would all be for nothing. Davis's eyes went wide. "What are you doing? You can't do that." Miller just laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that echoed in the narrow alley. He knelt down, shoving his hand towards the inside pocket of my coat, the baggie pinched between his thumb and forefinger. "Time to take out the trash," he sneered, his face inches from mine. This was it. The line had been crossed. The mission was important, but my life, my freedom, was on the line. The box inside me, the one holding back Special Agent Thorne, began to crack. As his fingers brushed against my coat, I looked him dead in the eye, and for the first time that night, I let him see behind the mask. My voice, when it came out, was no longer the raspy whisper of a broken man. It was calm, cold, and razor-sharp. "That's a felony, Officer Miller. Tampering with evidence, planting narcotics on a civilian. I'd estimate that carries a sentence of 5 to 7 years in a federal prison." For a long moment, the only sound in the alley was the distant wail of a siren and the dripping of water from an overflowing gutter. Officer Miller froze, his hand still hovering over my coat, the baggie of white powder looking obscene and out of place in the dim light. His sneer faltered, replaced by a flicker of genuine confusion. He stared at me, really looked at me for the first time, and I could see the gears turning behind his hate-filled eyes. He was trying to reconcile the articulate, legally precise sentence I'd just uttered with the filthy, broken man he saw before him. Then he burst out laughing. It was a harsh, ugly sound that scraped the raw edges of the night. "Oh, we got a jailhouse lawyer, do we?" he spat, his confidence flooding back in a tidal wave of arrogance. "You think throwing around some big words is going to save you? I've heard it all before from scum like you." He shoved me hard against the wall, the impact rattling my teeth. The pain in my ribs flared, sharp and electric. "You don't know a damn thing. I know that Internal Affairs takes a very dim view of falsifying police reports, especially when it's corroborated by a second officer's testimony," I said, my voice still level, cutting through his bluster like a scalpel. I flicked my eyes towards Davis, who looked like he'd just seen a ghost. "Isn't that right, Officer Davis? You're on record as being present. Your statement will be crucial, and when they check Miller's locker and find the rest of his little evidence stash, it'll be your word against his. A rookie's clean record versus a veteran with a history of complaints." Miller's face went from ruddy to pale in a heartbeat. The laughter died in his throat. How do you know about that?" he stammered, his bravado finally cracking. "It's amazing what you overhear when people think you're not listening," I said, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. The truth was, I'd run his jacket the first week I was on the street. I knew everything about him, his ex-wife, his gambling debts, the 2 excessive force complaints that had been quietly swept under the rug by his union rep. He was a predictable monster, and that made him vulnerable. "Miller, stop!" Davis pleaded, his voice cracking. He took a step back, creating distance between himself and his partner. He was seeing it now. This wasn't a routine roust. Something was dangerously wrong. "Let's just go, please. This isn't right." Miller's eyes darted between me and Davis, a cornered animal looking for an escape route. He had been completely in control, a king in his filthy little kingdom. Now his kingdom was crumbling around him, and his only subject was talking like a prosecutor. His fear was being rapidly replaced by a deeper, more potent emotion. Pure, unadulterated rage. He couldn't accept this. He couldn't allow a thing like me to humiliate him in front of a rookie. "You think you're smart," he hissed, his face inches from mine again. The smell of his breath was foul. "You think you can talk your way out of this? You're a nobody, less than nobody." He grabbed my arm in a vice-like grip, yanking me away from the wall. "You're under arrest, resisting, assaulting an officer." "On what grounds?" I asked, not struggling, letting him manhandle me. Every action he took now was just digging his own grave deeper. "On the grounds that I'm the law and you're a piece of trash," he roared, shoving the baggie into his own pocket and fumbling for his handcuffs. This was a critical moment. He was going to take me in. Once I was in the system, my cover would be blown, but not in the way I wanted. The operation would be compromised. The ghost would vanish. Years of work, gone. I had one last card to play before I had to give up the ghost myself. The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into my wrist. Click. He wrenched my other arm behind my back. My ribs screamed in protest. I grit my teeth, fighting back the urge to drop him where he stood. As the second cuff clicked shut, I saw it. A flicker of movement at the mouth of the alley. A man cloaked in shadows stood watching. He was thin, wiry, with a distinctive tattoo of a spiderweb on his neck. I knew him. His name was Weasel, one of the Ghost's top lieutenants and a suspected murderer. He wasn't just watching, he was observing, cataloging. He saw a cop arresting one of the local homeless guys. He was probably pleased to see me being taken off the board. But if he saw me get into that car and be treated with any kind of deference later, he'd know I was a plant. The entire network would go to ground. Miller had just made this 10 times more dangerous. He hadn't just compromised my mission. He had potentially signed my death warrant. "Let's go, smartass," Miller grunted, hauling me to my feet and starting to shove me towards the street. "You can tell your sob story to the judge." I had no choice. I had to change the game right now. I stopped dead, planting my feet. Miller pushed, but I didn't budge. He looked at me, surprised by the sudden resistance. I turned my head, ignoring him completely, and locking eyes with the terrified rookie. "Officer Davis," I said, my voice low and urgent, all pretense gone. "Listen to me very carefully. Your partner is under investigation by the Department of Justice for civil rights violations. You have 2 seconds to make a choice. You can either be a party to his crimes, or you can be the key witness that puts him away. But you need to understand something." I glanced towards the mouth of the alley, where Weasel was still watching, a predator sensing weakness. What he just did. Cuffing me in the open like this. He didn't just break the law. He just made you a target for the Mendez cartel. The name hung in the frigid air like a death sentence. Mendez cartel. It wasn't just a name whispered in the precinct's briefing rooms. It was a plague that had been sweeping across the city, leaving a trail of bodies and addiction in its wake. They were ruthless, untouchable, and light years beyond the pay grade of a uniformed beat cop. Officer Davis's face, already pale, turned the color of ash. His eyes widened in disbelief and dawning horror. He looked from me to the dark alley entrance, where the figure I'd called Weasel had melted back into the shadows the moment he heard the name. What are you talking about?" Davis stammered, his hand instinctively going to the grip of his service weapon. "The Mendez cartel? You're crazy." Miller, however, was past the point of reason. He was a bull seeing red. The mention of the cartel, a name that made even seasoned detectives sweat, only seemed to enrage him further. To him it was just more nonsense from a deranged transient trying to escape justice. "Shut your mouth," he bellowed, yanking my cuffed arms up high behind my back, forcing a grunt of pain from me. "You're not only resisting, now you're making threats. That's another 5 years, you piece of filth." "It's not a threat, it's a warning," I bit out through clenched teeth, my gaze still locked on the rookie. I had to get through to him. He was my only way out of this without blowing everything. The man at the end of the alley is named Eduardo Weasel Vargas. He's a lieutenant for the Ghost, who runs the cartel's entire street-level distribution in this city. He just watched a cop arrest me. I've spent the last 3 weeks getting close to him, feeding him information, making him believe I'm a reliable new recruit, and your partner just put me in handcuffs in front of him. I let the implications sink in. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken terror. If Weasel thought I was an informant who had been nabbed, his next move would be to clean house. That meant eliminating anyone and everyone connected to the situation, including the 2 cops who were on the scene. Loose ends were a liability the cartel did not tolerate. Davis swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. Miller, maybe we should listen to him. He knows the name. He knows Vargas. He knows nothing, Miller roared, his face turning a blotchy red. He was losing control, not just of the situation, but of himself. He probably heard the name on the news. It doesn't mean anything. Now get him in the car before I write you up for insubordination. He shoved me forward, out of the alley and onto the sidewalk under the sickly orange glow of a streetlight. The patrol car was parked a few feet away, its presence a beacon of officialdom in the grimy street. This was it. Once those doors closed, the game was over. I had to force the issue. As Miller reached for the car door handle, I used his own momentum against him. I twisted my body, dropping my center of gravity and hooking my foot behind his ankle in a classic takedown maneuver. It was a move born of instinct and 1,000 hours of training. Miller, completely unprepared for any sort of skilled resistance from a homeless bum, went down like a sack of bricks. He hit the wet pavement with a loud, grunting thud, his head narrowly missing the car's rear tire. I didn't give him a second to recover. I spun around, my cuffed hands now in front of me, and faced a stunned Officer Davis. His hand was on his gun, but his eyes were wide with shock, not aggression. He was a cop, not a killer. He was trained to react to threats, but I wasn't presenting as a threat. I was presenting as something else entirely, something he couldn't comprehend. "Davis, call it in," I said, my voice sharp with command. The voice of an agent, not a victim. "Tell dispatch you have a Code Sierra situation. Tell them you have an undercover federal officer whose cover has been compromised by Officer Frank Miller, badge number 714. Use those exact words. Do it now." Code Sierra. It was a designation so rare, so critical, that most patrol officers went their entire careers without hearing it. It signified an extreme danger situation involving a federal agent in deep cover. It was the all-hands-on-deck, drop everything call. It was a fire alarm for the entire law enforcement community in a 50-mile radius. Davis just stared at me, his mouth agape. On the ground, Miller was groaning, pushing himself up onto his elbows, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. "What did you say?" he snarled, spitting a bit of blood onto the pavement. "What the hell is a Code Sierra?" "It's the code that ends your career, Frank," I said, not taking my eyes off Davis. "It's the code that's going to bring every federal agent in this state down on your head in the next 10 minutes. Now, Officer Davis, you have one last chance to be on the right side of this. Make the call." Davis's hand trembled as he reached for the radio on his shoulder. He was caught in an impossible situation. On one side was his partner, a man he worked with every day, a man who represented the uniform and the brotherhood. On the other was a filthy, handcuffed stranger spouting jargon that sounded like it was ripped straight from a movie script. But there was something in my eyes, a certainty and an authority that transcended my appearance. He saw a man who wasn't afraid, even in handcuffs, even with a furious cop getting to his feet just inches away. He saw a man who was in complete control. His fingers fumbled with the radio mic. He brought it to his lips, his thumb hovering over the transmit button. This is Unit 211, he began, his voice shaking. Miller was on his feet now. He saw what was happening. He saw his world ending. And he snapped. With a primal roar of rage, he lunged, not at me, but at Davis. He slammed his body into the rookie, sending them both crashing against the side of the patrol car. The radio flew from Davis's hand, skittering across the pavement and coming to rest near a sewer grate. "You're not calling anyone," Miller screamed, his eyes wild. He shoved Davis aside and drew his weapon. The sound of the slide chambering around was deafeningly loud in the quiet street. He wasn't aiming at Davis. He wasn't aiming at the sky. He was pointing his service pistol directly at my chest. "You're not a Fed," he panted, his voice a ragged whisper of denial and terror. "You're nothing, and you're not going to ruin my life." The barrel of the Glock looked like a black hole, a void ready to swallow everything. Miller's hand was shaking, but not from fear or hesitation. It was the tremor of pure adrenaline, the kind of shake that doesn't affect accuracy at this range. His finger was white on the trigger. I saw his knuckles tense, saw the fractional movement as he took up the slack. In that frozen sliver of a second, my life didn't flash before my eyes. Instead, my training took over. I analyzed angles, escape routes, probabilities. All of them were bad. "Miller, don't!" Davis yelled, scrambling to his feet. He had his own weapon out now, but it was pointed at the ground. his face a mess of panic and indecision. He was a rookie, trained to de-escalate, to talk suspects down. He had never been trained for this, a firefight with his own partner. "He's lying, Davis, can't you see that?" Miller screamed, his spittle flying. "He's a psycho. He's trying to get inside your head." His eyes were locked on mine, wide and unblinking. He wasn't just trying to kill a potential problem anymore. He was trying to erase a reality he couldn't accept. If he pulled that trigger, he could go back to believing I was just another piece of street trash who got what he deserved. "Think, Miller," I said, my voice dangerously calm. I needed to keep him focused on me, to keep his mind working, however erratically. A thinking man hesitates. A raging man just pulls the trigger. You shoot me, a handcuffed man, in front of a witness. Even if I am who you think I am, your career is over. You'll be in a cell for the rest of your life. But if I'm telling the truth, you won't even make it to trial." "Shut up! Shut up!" he shrieked, the gun wavering slightly. He was coming apart at the seams. I had to give Davis an order he could follow, something to break his paralysis. "Davis!" I barked, using my agent's voice again. "Get on your radio. Report an officer-involved shooting in progress. Shots are about to be fired." The phrase, "shots fired," is a Pavlovian bell for every cop on the street. It's the worst-case scenario. It was the jolt Davis needed. He lunged for the fallen radio near the sewer grate, his choice finally made. Seeing this, seeing his partner finally and irrevocably side against him, broke the last thread of Miller's sanity. He made a guttural, animalistic sound and shifted his aim from my chest to Davis's back. He wasn't thinking about consequences anymore. He was just lashing out, trying to silence the source of his betrayal. I didn't even think. My body moved on its own. Cuffed hands are a liability, but they're also a weapon. I lunged forward, swinging my arms like a club. The steel of the cuffs connected with Miller's wrist with a sickening crack of bone. He screamed, a high-pitched sound of agony, and the gun fired. The shot went wide, the bullet ricocheting off the brick wall of the alley with a sound like an angry wasp. The gun clattered to the pavement. Before he could recover, I slammed my shoulder into his chest, driving him backward. We crashed against the patrol car with a heavy thud, the frame groaning under the impact. He was bigger than me, but I had leverage and the element of surprise. I twisted, using my leg to sweep his feet out from under him again. He went down hard, his head bouncing off the asphalt with a hollow thud. He lay there, dazed and groaning, clutching his shattered wrist. Panting, I turned to Davis. He was on his knees, radio in hand, staring at the scene with wide, terrified eyes. He had the mic to his lips. "Shots fired, officer down. I repeat, shots fired. Send backup, send everyone." He'd said, "officer down." He was talking about Miller. In the heat of the moment, his training had defaulted to protecting his partner, even the one who had just tried to shoot him. The night was suddenly filled with the sound of approaching sirens. Not one or two, but a whole chorus of them, screaming closer from every direction. The shots fired call, combined with a potential Code Sierra, had lit up the entire city's emergency response system. We had at most 90 seconds before the street was swarming with cops who would arrive to see one of their own on the ground and a homeless man in cuffs standing over him. It was a recipe for a very bad, very public execution. And to make matters worse, I heard another sound, a soft scrape of a shoe on pavement from the alley. Weasel was back, or he'd never left. He'd have seen all of this. He now knew I wasn't just an informant. I was something else entirely, something dangerous. He'd report this up the chain, and the ghost would know the FBI was closing in. The entire operation was about to be blown sky high. I had to control the narrative, and I had to do it now. I knelt beside Miller, who was now semi-conscious, and with a grunt of effort, I retrieved his keys from his belt. My fingers, clumsy from the cold and the adrenaline, finally found the handcuff key. With a click, my right wrist was free. Another click, and I was completely unrestrained. I tossed the cuffs aside. I stood up and faced Davis, who was now on his feet, his gun still in his hand, but now pointed at me. His face was a battlefield of confusion, fear, and a cop's ingrained suspicion. Who are you?" he breathed, the sirens growing louder with every passing second. I reached inside my filthy coat, the one Miller had tried to plant the drugs in. My fingers found the small, hidden seam I had stitched myself weeks ago. I tore it open and pulled out a small, airtight plastic bag. Inside was my identification. It felt foreign in my hand after so long. I took out the slim leather wallet and flipped it open, holding it up for him to see. The gold shield of the Federal Bureau of Investigation gleamed under the streetlight, seeming to burn a hole in the darkness. Special Agent Marcus Thorne, FBI, I said, my voice steady and clear over the rising cacophony of sirens. And you, Officer Davis, are now my primary witness in a federal investigation. But right now, we have a bigger problem. I nodded towards the mouth of the alley. They know, and they're not going to just let us walk away from this. As if on cue, the first patrol car screeched around the corner, its headlights pinning us in their glare. Then another, and another. Doors flew open, and officers took up positions behind their vehicles, guns drawn, shouting commands that were lost in the noise. Through the strobing red and blue lights, I saw them. 2 figures detaching themselves from the deeper shadows of the alley across the street. They weren't cops. They were dressed in dark hoodies, their movements fluid and predatory. And in their hands I could see the distinct, menacing silhouette of suppressed assault rifles. The world devolved into a chaotic symphony of shouting, sirens, and strobing lights. The newly arrived cops saw a scene straight out of their worst nightmares, 2 of their own down, a vagrant standing between them, and now armed hostiles emerging from the shadows. To them I was just another variable in a lethal equation, and their guns were trained on the most immediate, unexplained threat me. FBI, I'm a federal agent, I roared, holding my badge high, trying to cut through the confusion. Hostiles across the street, 2 of them, armed with long guns. My voice, a beacon of command in the chaos, seemed to register with a few of the officers. I saw some of them shift their aim, their training kicking in to assess the new, more significant threat. But others kept their weapons fixed on me, caught in the crossfire of conflicting information. Davis, to his credit, reacted instantly. The sight of my credentials and the appearance of the cartel soldiers solidified everything. The crazy homeless man wasn't crazy. He was right. "He's with us," Davis yelled, moving to stand beside me, his own weapon now aimed across the street. "They're cartel. Take cover." The 2 shooters didn't wait for an invitation. Muffled fut-fut-fut sounds echoed in the urban canyon as their suppressed weapons opened up. Sparks flew from the patrol cars as rounds stitched across the metal. The cops scrambled for better cover, returning fire with the loud, booming cracks of their service pistols. It was a pathetic response to the cartel's overwhelming firepower. They were pinned down, outgunned. Weasel and his partner weren't trying to win a protracted firefight. This was a cleanup operation. Their primary target was me, the federal agent who had infiltrated their network. Their secondary targets were the 2 cops who had witnessed it, Miller and Davis. They were erasing the incident. "We need to move," I yelled to Davis over the gunfire. "They have the high ground and the superior weapons. We're sitting ducks here." I grabbed the front of Miller's vest. He was groaning, conscious but useless, and started dragging him toward the relative safety of the alley I had just escaped. "Help me with him." "Hey." Davis holstered his weapon and grabbed Miller's legs. Together we hauled the dead weight of the disgraced cop off the street and back into the darkness of the alley. Bullets whizzed past the entrance, chipping away at the brickwork. The arriving police were doing their best, but they were caught in a kill zone. Once we were out of the direct line of fire, I laid Miller down. He was mumbling incoherently, clutching his broken wrist. He was a problem for another time. "Stay here and keep pressure on him if he's hit," I ordered Davis. "And keep your head down." I took Davis's pistol from his holster. He didn't resist. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice tight with fear. "Ending this," I replied. I checked the magazine. Nearly full. I crept to the edge of the alley, peering around the corner. The shooters had advanced slightly, using the parked cars for cover, methodically suppressing the police response. They were professionals, but they had made a critical mistake. They had assumed we would cower in the alley, waiting for a rescue that might not come. They had forgotten about the network of fire escapes and interconnected rooftops that crisscrossed this part of the city. This had been my home for 3 weeks. I knew its secrets better than they did. At the back of the alley was a rusted, rickety fire escape. I'd used it a dozen times to get a better vantage point on the street. Without a second thought, I started climbing, the cold metal groaning in protest under my weight. I moved quickly, my body fueled by a surge of adrenaline that banished the cold and the pain in my ribs. I reached the roof just as the shooters were preparing to make their final push, ready to execute the pinned-down officers. From my new perch, I had a perfect, unobstructed view. They were exposed, their attention focused entirely on the street below. I was the ghost they were hunting, and I had just become their nightmare. I dropped to one knee, adopting a stable firing stance, the borrowed Glock feeling solid and familiar in my hands. I centered the front sight on the lead shooter's chest. I took a breath, let it out halfway, and squeezed the trigger. The shot was clean. The shooter crumpled without a sound, his rifle clattering to the pavement. His partner spun around, his face a mask of shock, searching for the source of the shot. He found me, a dark silhouette against the faint glow of the city skyline. He raised his rifle, but he was too slow. My second shot caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around. My third took him in the leg, sending him to the ground in a heap. I didn't kill him. I wanted him alive. He had answers I needed. The sudden silence on the street was deafening. The sirens were still screaming, but the immediate threat was gone. I could hear officers shouting, cautiously advancing on the wounded gunman. My part in the firefight was over. I descended the fire escape, my heart still hammering against my ribs. When I stepped back into the alley, Davis was staring at me with an expression of pure awe. In the space of 15 minutes, he had seen me go from a pathetic victim to a tactical operator who had single-handedly neutralized a cartel-hit squad. Seconds later, the alley was flooded with tactical officers in heavy gear. This time, however, they didn't point their weapons at me. A man in a sharp suit, his face grim, pushed through them. It was my section chief, Agent Henderson. "Thorne," he said, his eyes quickly taking in the scene me in my filthy clothes, the dazed rookie, the moaning, disgraced cop on the ground. "You have a talent for making a mess." "They made me, Henderson," I said, handing the Glock back to a still-stunned Davis. Miller blew my cover. The ghost knows we're on to him. "We know," Henderson said, pointing to an earpiece. "We heard everything from Davis's open mic. The Code Sierra, the takedown, all of it. Good work." He then looked at Miller with utter contempt. "As for him, he's about to find out what happens when you assault a federal officer. He'll be lucky if he ever sees daylight again." The resolution was swift. Miller was taken into custody, his career and his freedom ending in the same alley where he'd so often abused his power. The wounded cartel shooter, as I'd hoped, gave up his boss. The Ghost. His real name was Ricardo Mendez, the unassuming nephew of the cartel's kingpin. Weasel's intel, combined with everything I had gathered, allowed us to execute a series of coordinated raids the very next morning. We dismantled his entire operation from the top down. The Ghost was apprehended trying to flee the city on a private jet. The homeless population, the invisible victims he'd preyed on, were finally safe from him. A week later, I was back in a suit, feeling clean for the first time in a month. Officer Davis was brought into my office at the field headquarters. He was out of his uniform, looking nervous. "You wanted to see me, Agent Thorne?" he asked. "Marcus," I corrected him. "Sit down, Davis. I wanted to thank you. You were in an impossible situation, and when it mattered, you made the right choice. That takes courage." He shrugged, looking down at his hands. I swore an oath to uphold the law. He was breaking it. It didn't matter that he wore the same uniform. "That's why you're going to be a good cop," I said. I pushed a file across the desk. "Your testimony was instrumental in securing the indictment against Miller, but it also put a target on your back with what's left of the Mendez organization. For your protection, we're recommending a transfer. Somewhere far away from here. But it comes with a promotion. Detective." His eyes went wide. "Detective? But I'm just a rookie." "You're a rookie who kept his head while bullets were flying and his partner was trying to kill him," Henderson said, stepping into the room. "You've earned it." The Bureau doesn't forget its friends. Davis left that day with a new future, a clean slate. My own future was back to what it had always been, hunting the monsters that hide in the shadows. As I looked out my office window at the sprawling city, I thought about that cold alley. I had gone there to find a ghost, to become invisible. But in the end, it was a bully with a badge who forced me back into the light. And in doing so, he hadn't just kicked a homeless man. He had kicked over a hornet's nest, and in the ensuing storm, true justice had finally been served.